All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. We've got three outstanding speakers for today's brown bagger. We're in session 4, and I suspect most everybody that's joined has been on our previous iterations this fall, but we have rebranded our NBC EC brown bagger series under our eBEEF extension umbrella. So the animal breeding and genetics extension specialists around the country. There's 6 or 7 of us engaged in that activity for eBEEF coordinated activities. If you have a minute and need additional resources in the beef genetics space, eBEEF.org is your one-stop shop for all things beef genetics. Encourage you to check that out. We're certainly delighted to have you all here in our fourth and final installment of the Future-Proofing Beef Selection Decisions webinar series. I'm Bob Weber. I'm hosting today, work here at Kansas State University, and pleased to have colleagues Dare Bullock at the University of Kentucky and Matt Spangler at University of Nebraska as my partners in crime, delivering this particular series. And we're most of all happy that you've joined us and hopefully find this a useful resource. Again, eBEEF.org is the one-stop shop for beef genetics stuff. I encourage you to take a look there. As a note, our series, if you happen to miss one of the previous sessions, the archive will be updated here in the next couple of weeks with the video recordings from this and the previous 3 installments for the 2024 season at eBEEF.org. Okay, so our first speaker, as I mentioned, we've got a full house today. Full agenda. Dr. Mark Boggess is the extension director at the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska. He's been in that role for some time and oversees the 5 research management units in ARS national programs. Mark's responsible for the overall management of the center at USMARC, which includes 220 state and federal employees, about 35,000 acres of range pasture and crop ground, and an average annual meat animal population of about 20,000 head of beef cattle, sheep, and swine. Dr. Boggess most recently served as director of the U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center in Madison, Wisconsin. In that role, he oversaw 3 research management units serving 3 USDA-ARS national programs. Prior to that, Dr. Boggess served as the national program leader, USDA-ARS, in food animal production, pasture and forage, and rangeland agroecosystems. That's a mouthful, Mark. That was a long title. And worked out of Beltsville, Maryland. Dr. Boggess has a diverse livestock industry background in the animal sciences and animal production, having served as swine and beef cattle extension specialist at the University of Idaho, president of Salmon Creek Farms, LLC, a branded pork company based in Twin Falls, Idaho, and director of the Animal Science Committee for the National Pork Board. Mark grew up on a livestock and crop farm in rural southwest Iowa, where he's a member of both 4-H and FFA. Dr. Boggess received his BS in animal science from Iowa State, MS from Cornell University, where he managed in animal breeding, and a PhD from Iowa State, also in animal breeding. I didn't realize that you were a Cornell graduate as well. Congratulations. And animal breeder. So that's fantastic. Mark and his wife Gladys and daughter Isabel currently reside in beautiful Hastings, Nebraska. Mark, thanks for joining us. I will pass control for you here in just a sec. I'll mute, and the floor will be yours.
Great. Yeah, that bio was too much. So thank you, Bob, and I appreciate it. And boy, I do appreciate the opportunity to join you all. These have been great sessions and pretty exciting to be included. You're going to hear less about genetics and BIF and that kind of stuff. We do crazy great research at Clay Center, as you know, and you've listened and heard from many of us, and you know many of us. We're going to talk a bit more about energy and how we're looking at the world and how we're trying to evolve an advocacy role for the center to help us with future funding challenges and all kinds of things. So hopefully that'll come across, and we'll see if I have control here, Bob. There we go. So again, thanks again to all of you. Just a little bit of a quick overview of the center, a little bit of our crazy, interesting history. But the center is 35,000 acres, and it's in Hastings, Nebraska, which is very central to the USA if you look at a map, and was very critical with respect to the war effort, right? It was a Navy ammunition depot in World War II. That footprint was originally 48,000 acres. It employed 11,000 employees in a matter of weeks. It was commissioned on July 14th of 1942. And in 2 weeks, the 300 families that lived there were gone, and they were building this huge factory, right? And they actually shipped ordnance as early as 1 year. We ended up with 34,500 of those acres, kind of the furthest from Hastings. And we could spend an hour on this, but I just thought I'd touch base there. If you've been here, you've seen some of the legacy, right, of the war effort. All kinds of stuff were built here, but maybe the most interesting munitions were the 16-inch shells for the Iowa, the Missouri, the Wisconsin, the New Jersey, right? It was incredible technology at the time. 2,700-pound shells that could be thrown 24 miles by those ships, and they could reload every 20 seconds and fire all 9. And this is a picture of the New Jersey doing that. I don't know how they got a picture back in the day, but the technology was pretty amazing for its period, right? So as you can imagine, when you put that much effort in on such a short timeline, it was a bit of a mess afterwards. So it took a while, decommissioned in 1958, but it took a while until about 1966 to close the military effort. And then the USDA moved in late in the 60s. And we essentially started doing research plus or minus the year 1970. So again, we have, to Bob's point in the introduction, about 220 employees were split right down the middle. And Bailey, who's on here, and others from from the USDA research side of the fence are employed by the federal government through USDA. And the other half, about 110 employee positions, most of them are full finally for the first time in a while, are employed by UNL. And they do all of our ranching and farming and automotive repair shop and heavy equipment and all those kinds of things. So we're more or less a self-contained entity. We do almost all of our own farming and maintenance and construction and all that kind of thing. Our annual budget's about 24 million. We generate another 9 to 10 million in farm and ranch receipts, which are important to us. And the reason I'm mentioning those is that's what pays the UNL staff. We don't get any state money or any UNL funds for their salaries. So it's important that we not only do the research, but we do it in a manner that's efficient and as close to industry standard as possible. And then we also generate another 2 to 3 million in grant funds. Current populations are just short of 7,600 cows. We'd like to have been higher by about 1,000 cows. About 3 years of drought was pretty tough on us. We had a better summer, but we're dry again this fall. About 2,100 ewes, of course that changes. And then we get 20 litters of baby pigs a week. It's a very productive group of sows. More or less comes out to 500 sows. And we have a pretty traditional feedlot operation with a capacity of about 6,400 head, sorry. And it's only full about this time of year, right? When we have a few heavy cattle left. We're feeding out some coal heifers, and then we are starting to almost finish, actually. This week we'll finish weaning of 5,000 plus baby calves. So again, 34,500 acres, about 24,000 of that's dry land. The other is used under irrigation, with 56 pivots plus 2 or 3 sections that are gated pipe irrigated. So about 7,300 total acres under irrigation. And we produce all of our own corn, grain, and corn silage, alfalfa, irrigated pasture, soybeans, silage, especially ryegrass for silage, especially to wean calves on, and a lot of annual forage, cover crops, and that kind of thing. Going through this quickly, you're welcome to call or email me. You can have the slides, and we're recording it. So if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to check back in. Just a few pictures right quick of the location. So that's kind of us in respect to how we're organized and what the footprint looks like. We have 5 research units. Many of you be familiar with at least some of these. Genetics and animal breeding is Dr. Larry Keene. You know him probably, and that's a great group. Meat quality, meat safety group is Tommy Wheeler. Our nutrition growth and physiology group used to be Harvey Freetley. Many of you probably know that name, and that's Amanda Lindholm now, and doing a great job in an acting role there. Clay Lentz is in charge of our livestock biosystems unit, which is basically reproduction, lifetime productivity, and systems approaches to that. And then we have a small but mighty environmental group that's working on feedlot surface emissions and water quality associated with lagoon storage programs, et cetera. And lastly, currently we have a vacancy in the RL at the Animal Health Genomics Unit, but another group that's doing great work with the genome edited heifer that's immune to BVD, more or less anyway, and congestive heart failure work in low elevation feedlots in western Nebraska. That group is doing some of that kind of work. I'm going to focus just a minute on the GPE project that Larry and Bailey and others at the center manage and care for. This is a herd that was originated, most of you probably know this, in the 70s to look at breed complementarity, to evaluate the continental breeds when they came in the United States, to look at heterosis and crossbreeding effects and make that knowledge available. And the reason I'm sharing it with you today is I want to impress upon you how we're trying to look at determining what the impact of this work has been and using it as a way to create strong arguments, right, with our leadership and through USDA and with stakeholders for further funding for these kinds of projects that you're all familiar with doing a share of, collaborating with, et cetera, right? So this herd has looked at over 1,000 highly influential sires over the years. There's just short of 4,000 cows here out of the 7,500 or so that are on this project. And we have a great database, right? We have 40,000 calves, which more or less are phenotyped with DNA and tissue samples. Pretty extraordinary resource. I think one of the most valuable genetic data sets in the world. Good news, I think, for us, and particularly exciting for the team here at USMARC, is that we now have GPE cattle in 2 different locations south of us. One in Beeville at the Texas A&M AgriLife Station there. A small herd there and a small herd at our ARS research lab in El Reno, Oklahoma. So for the first time, we really do have the opportunity to really dial in on G by E, right? Genetic by environmental differences and how these cattle interact with their environments and management systems. That's pretty exciting. So and we're looking to expand that further. Excuse me, if you have ideas or you're interested in learning more about that, by all means, reach out to our crew and we can talk more about it. But here's the point I wanted to make today. So I'd like to really understand what's the scientific impact been of this program, right? So the GPE example, what are realized opportunities? Well, I don't think anybody would argue they've had some effect on increasing genetic progress for the U.S. beef industry. I don't think it's a trivial impact, but I have no idea how to value that, right? I also am sure that you'd agree that it's had really a great role, impact, and benefit for crossbreeding systems, describing breed complementarity, helping people understand opportunities associated with crossbreeding, et cetera. Really focusing now, for example, on how do you manage your heifers and young cows and also implement terminal sire, right? So there's a lot of work left to do there, but I think that's also been valuable and also not trivial. But again, really hard to assign any kind of an economic value. And we've been poking at this for a couple of years and trying to look at a way to do that. And I think we could understand, though, that irregardless of what those numbers might be with respect to economic value, we would agree that better performance is more beef and should have resulted and does result even over the long period and reduce cost to consumers. So let's say, for example, if we took credit for a 1% reduction in the cost of beef to consumers, and these numbers are from 2022. I should have updated them because I do have new numbers and I forgot to do that, so I apologize. But that translates to actually quite a bit larger in 2023, more than over $1 billion. So we're going to assign a number in excess of $1 billion to this one project. And I think, I don't know that we're going to get a lot of arguments. I'm not going to say or testify that that's exactly true, But the point is, we're trying to figure out how to do this because we need to be able to demonstrate impact and market the programs with our leadership and USDA leadership and our stakeholders more aggressively, more proactively, in addition to fighting misinformation and all things that you struggle with on a daily basis. I think how we assign economic value to the research that we're doing and you're doing is going to be more important in the future. So if you have ideas about how to improve this process or how to look at this impact, we are all ears. But I thought I'd share that with you as a point of potential future conversation. This herd and the research associated with it has also contributed to 5 ARS Hall of Fame inductees, and you know most of those names in part or whole, right? Tim Smith is currently still with us at the center. Also 4 Morrison Award winners from the American Society of Animal Science, and several Pioneer and other awards from BIF, which we greatly appreciate, still working for us there. Gary's retired recently, of course, but Larry, Mark, and Warren are all still on board. So it's been a great program, a great project, and I think it's as valuable now as it's ever been. And we look forward to continuing this great work. And we'd appreciate all input that you could provide about how we might even better fine-tune this to meet the demands, create the strongest value proposition possible from this work. A few other recent accomplishments. I think I'll skip this, but we got a lot going on. We're open for business, and we'd love to talk more about our programs and how they have been providing solutions for a generation, and we continue to do that. I think we set a record this year with the highest number of pubs, at least in my tenure here. So it's a very, very productive group and doing a great job. So to the point of the discussion today, what are some of the new energy and what are some of the programs we're focusing on, hopefully to better position USMARC for additional funding, better support for our great stakeholder collaborators, et cetera, right? So again, you all know these things, but our focus is on complexity, right? Complex product system optimization and improved resource use efficiency. Expanding the G, right, of genetics by environment, by management, by socioeconomic factors to also include microbiomes. If we think about a systems approach, that would be microbiomes and genomic effects associated with forages, right? Or cropping systems and how that fits together but with a G by E by M, and what are the genetic roles of different crops and how does that work? We'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm terrified, to be perfectly blunt, about the explosion of artificial intelligence and where that's taking us. I've asked my leadership team to do some training. We're part of an AI users forum in ARS and USDA that's coming up next month, and we're developing a data science working group. So if you have insights into how you're using AI or how we might consider using AI, again, we're all ears, and we're trying to maybe catch up, but definitely build out our beachhead, and we got a lot of good work going on in these areas. I'm just not sure that we're ready to embrace an optimized amount or a appropriate amount of work in these areas, and trying to get ahead of that, right? We're all dealing with climate variability. I've been in my chair for 6 years. We've been minus 34 and 105, right? And there's a long way between those two temperatures. And you all get it, right? And then much more work around nitrogen and carbon, particularly nitrogen for us. Talk a bit about that. And then we really want to expand that systems approach to embrace soil ecology and biodiversity and the continuum with that and into forages and cropping science and that kind of thing. So one way we're looking at it, right, is just based on opportunity. I make the point that there's 13.5 million square miles of rangelands on Earth that aren't going to raise lettuce anytime soon. And the best possible use of that is going to be through ruminant agriculture. And there's no way we feed 10 billion people without it. And not going to dwell on that, but you also get it. And again, we're looking at understanding complexity through the lens, the GEMS lens, as a function of genetics by environment, by management. And then we're adding the S, right? Socioeconomic factors. So that's the platform that the rest of my comments will kind of be anchored around, is the GEMS concept, right? They're really critical, they're incredibly complex, and we must also address these evolving social economic factors. One way we're looking at that, and we've been working on this for a few years, is the Beef Systems Research Consortium. I'm going to provide a little more detail there. An effort we call Nitrogen 2.0. We're developing a strategic plan that I think is going to help us realize some opportunity. And we're going to coalesce those three efforts into one kind of a global look at how we're going to look at science going forward. Others, of course, that we are engaging, the Global Methane Hub, and Bailey and others are working on that. We're part of the leadership team for a Salmonella Grand Challenge, doing a lot of, hopefully a lot more precision animal work in the future. And I mentioned already the Data Science Working Group. So those three initiatives are a focus, and we're really trying to focus on the circular bioeconomy that's associated with meat animal production, galvanize, simplify the complexity to the degree possible, and really focus that on our mission. How do we better leverage the resource that is USMARC? How do we address and focus on evolving industry and societal priorities on the ground? I mean, really get down again to that interface with cattlemen and producers and make sure we're providing as much value there as we possibly can. And then how do we better leverage and market the programs and resources that we have and can attribute incredible success and incredible potential in the future? How do we best leverage and market those? So the strategic plan is really focusing on people, right? We promote a lot of people. We rearrange some things. We're working on better understanding what leadership means. GEMS, of course, on the ground. We've added part of the people part is a full-time communications specialist to help us get out into the schools and into the local universities and to help us develop marketing materials and document impact, all those kinds of things. But maybe most importantly, we want to move forward with a model that describes USMARC as a living lab and build our portfolios around that concept. And I'm going to just kind of blow through here because I'm going to run out of time, and I'm going to, I think, talk about most of this anyway here in a moment. Just for fun, this is a slide that we put together to look at complexity, right? What are the factors that influence genetics and animal breeding? Which ones can we focus on? Which ones are most important? Where do we have resources? Where do we have teams and collaborations? If you click on any one of these circles, those answers or our opinions, anyway, relative to those questions pop up. And we're using this to describe what our research portfolio is going to look like in 10 years, 5 to 10 years as based as part of our strategic plan. So this one's bad enough, looks pretty tough. But when you look at soil ecology and environmental sustainability, it's even worse, right? So we're going to have to pick and choose. We're going to have to be very disciplined around where we put resources, how we look at this, how do we collaborate, how do we not invent the wheel. And this is just a couple tools that we're using at the moment to look at these opportunities. We have a Beef Systems Research Consortium in place. It's dovetailed with UNL's Beef Innovation Team. It's built around a grand challenge where we move cattle from USMARC to Oklahoma and Colorado and to Montana as calf feds, and looked at how they developed in different systems with rangeland backgrounding in Montana and wheatgrass pastures in Oklahoma, for example. That's come to a close, and now we're back to focusing on how the cows might be best served in these diverse environments. And kind of a summary slide for all that is we want to start and end with soil health, and we want to better understand how soils and forage systems interact, right? How do those forage systems and beef production systems interact? What can we learn year over year? How can we optimize this system, keep it evolving, keep it growing, right? And better understand all these factors. And again, always keeping in mind that the end product is most important of all. And again, we're going too fast, I understand, but this is sort of the way we're trying to package this and work across ARS and with several of our partner land grant institutions. Again, this is going to be focused around 10 different principles, right? We have 2 or 3 of these working now on at least some pilot projects. This will be pasture and forage and rangeland forage systems, beef cattle genetics, and beef cattle nutrition. And we'd like to eventually, with funding and with a little more time and in collaboration with many people, like I mentioned earlier, to expand this to all 10 and see if we can't not reinvent anything, but put together a more cohesive program that includes our resources in ARS and critical partners in the land grant system. Second one I want to touch on is one that's a little different. This is an effort that started in corn maize to extend the growing period to almost completely eliminate or drastically reduce the amount of nitrogen used in corn production. That's called circular economies to reimagine corn agriculture. That's being funded through the president's budget and potentially through Congress this year. And again, the idea is to really cut the protein that's produced in corn, reduce the nitrogen use, improve the efficiency, and harvest an increased amount of starch and energy and less protein. There's also a manure shed, a manure and nitrogen manure recycling component that's being developed, and then a sustainable livestock production system component that's being developed, and that's where USMARC comes in. So we're part of this Nitrogen 2.0 effort, and again, watching how the funding develops through the corn grain part, right? So large group of stakeholders, national meetings have been completed. There's a strong team and a strong vision. So we'll see where this goes. This is the graphic that goes with that. And you can see that it's based on two circular economies, one on the production, cropping and livestock side, and one on the food production, synthetic and amino acids, and the fertilizer industry. How do we better create opportunities for improved efficiencies, right? So implementation of those things, so the beef systems work with the Nitrogen 2.0 work with our strategic plan, focused around beef and sheep and swine focus groups, focused around additional communication, right? And we're also building a new external group that Bob and others are a part of. And we're going to call that the USMARC Livestock Industry Advocacy Council. It's hosted by the Nebraska Cattlemen and being led currently by Ronnie Green, who was one of us, right? He's a member of the Animal Science Society. He was National Program Leader for ARS. Most recently, he was Chancellor at UNL. That group is coming together. We're going to have our first meetings this fall, hopefully an in-person meeting relatively soon in the summer. And the idea is to help us argue via the living lab model, our incredible history and future opportunity, help us argue against the headwinds, right, that are blowing directly in the face of meat animal production with respect to food security and human healthfulness. So more on that, and that's a topic for another day, but that's how we're kind of trying to get our arms around being aggressive on the marketing side. And in summary, I guess, if you look at the living lab model and really focusing on circular bioeconomies, we're going to be laser focused on GEMS, right? That's going to help us understand complexity and opportunity. We're really going to look hard, and we're developing the working groups around the bioecological laboratory, the living lab. We talked a bit about Nitrogen 2.0 and the beef systems work. We're going to continue to embrace those opportunities, and that's going to serve us well, I think, in driving our strategic plan forward, really looking at those value propositions and opportunities to make sure that we're really in step with industry and with the work that you're all doing. That would be important for us to understand and potentially to collaborate with. So that's what I have, and hopefully that was not too long. I understand I'm an extension specialist, so I always have too many slides, but that's the best I could do there. But
recovering extension specialist, right?
yes, a recovering extension specialist and a recovering national program leader, both. So,
well, Mark, thanks for that update, and I'm always amazed at the breadth and scope of the work done at MARC. Obviously, I've had numerous opportunities to visit the center, work closely with a number of the scientists there, but it's I think just an amazing resource for us, both domestically and internationally. There's no other laboratory like it on the planet, and no the important work that you all do, and appreciate your leadership. And I think as we envision the future of MARC, maybe what are some practical things that we as constituents might do to help support your scientists, support you, the center. Coach us a bit there.
Yeah, so that's great. So appreciate that, Bob. And I'm going to take no credit for this, right? I mean, I'm in a great role. I love it. But the scientists are the people doing the work and getting it done. And that's the testimony I think that you all need to stick with, right? And we're open for business. Come and see us. But the reality is, to your point, we were 64 scientists 20 years ago. I'm going to piggyback this with NADC, National Animal Disease Center in Ames, Iowa. They were 80 plus scientists 20 years ago. We're both in the low 40s now, right? We've had to cannibalize programs to stay open and to focus on the resources that are maybe most valuable to us, but at the expense of some others that might have been, had they been allowed to thrive. And we're right on the edge of having to do that again. And that's why the advocacy group is so important. That's why your support and advocacy is so important. So if you're in a position to talk to your stakeholders or to your congressional leadership, by all means, please do that. We can help you with that. We can answer any question presented to us. We just can't lobby, right? So the advocacy group that we mentioned is being built outside of the framework of USMARC for that reason, so that they can say the things that need to be said, get the right people in front of the important stakeholders and leaders. And I think we're poised to do great things. I think the opportunity for all of you on this session and for us is absolutely extraordinary. We just have to be allowed to do it, and we have to have enough funding to get it done. So anything you do there help would be great benefit. So appreciate that, Bob.
Well, and I think the national dialogue around food security and its role in domestic security is starting to get listened to more frequently. And
right. I agree.
Support that and maintain. The world's an interesting place in food production, and we play obviously a big role here in the United States exporting food around the world. We've got to continue that as a country for our own security as well. So
I agree. It is a critical time. I mean, I think we're looking at a fork in the road. We're either going to get validation that this work is important by current leadership in USDA and other places, or we're not. And if we don't, that's going to be pretty dangerous. There's language in the Senate Ag Appropriations Bill asking the ARS what they're going to do in the future to limit research on living animals. And we think it's aimed more at laboratory kinds of research, but it doesn't say it that very clearly. And that's a really disconcerting comment to have in an appropriations bill. So there are a lot of headwinds, and anything you can do to help us and help yourselves, help us help you as well. We'd be glad to be a partner in a conversation. We are really welcome. We are really, we'd be happy to do that. There you go. We'd be happy to support those.
Appreciate that very much.
Thank you,
Have questions for our audience for Dr. Boggess. I failed to remind you all of the Q&A box. I don't see any open questions, and I know Mark's on a short fuse for another meeting he's attending there in Lincoln this week. So if you've got a question for Mark, maybe quickly type that, and we'll try and get that answered before we move to our next speaker, Dr. Wulf.
Absolutely, or just shoot me an email or through Bob. We'd be happy to pick this conversation up. I presented a lot of stuff, so if you want me to break that down, I'd be happy to do that in the future.
Great. Well, Mark, I don't see any additional questions. Outstanding job. Really appreciate your time today, and of course, the leadership there at MARC, and wish you good luck in your meetings this week.
Great, thank you.
Great. All right. Get this box moved over. Our next speaker is Dr. Duane Wulf. Dr. Wulf and I actually crossed paths in graduate school way back in the day. I won't say when that was, Duane, but had the good fortune of meeting you and your dear bride, Anne, as graduate students there at Colorado State. Dr. Wulf is director of the Arid Lands and Animal Production Initiative at the University of Arizona. Dr. Wulf's got a bachelor's and master's degree in animal science from South Dakota State University, and a PhD in animal science, of course, from Colorado State. Dr. Wulf's held faculty positions at Ohio State and South Dakota State. I forgot about the Ohio State piece of history in your background there. But he attained the rank of full professor while at SDSU. His university research focuses on ante and postmortem factors affecting meat quality, and has attracted numerous graduate students and has more than 45 refereed journal articles. So a really productive scientist. One of the, I think, unique and interesting pieces of your background is that Dr. Wulf served as a missionary businessman in Sonora, Mexico, around a meat processing plant, cattle ranch, and restaurant that were all designed and built with the purpose of providing training and career opportunities to the fatherless and less fortunate. So a big contribution to humanity, and I've heard of the positive role and impact you had during that time in Mexico, and just think it's a remarkable story. In addition to those positions, Dr. Wulf's worked across all production and processing phase in the meat industry, and has been hired as a consultant both domestically and internationally by small and large companies. Dr. Wulf came back to academia in 2020 as associate professor at the University of Arizona, principally with a teaching and research appointment, and recently has moved to this director position for the Arizona Arid Lands and Animal Production Initiative. He's active in American Meat Science Association, and has served on their board of directors, and his awards include the AMSA Distinguished Teaching Award and Achievement Awards, and the South Dakota State Distinguished Alumni Award. And knowing your passion for teaching, these two are important. SDSU College of Ag and Bioscience Teacher of the Year 2 times. So Duane, great to see you. Appreciate you joining us. Duane's talk today is going to be around beef yield grading, history, issues, and opportunities. For those of you in the audience, many of you may be aware of the work going on to revisit the beef yield grade equations and our ability to predict boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts through the processing phase, and as that enters the value chain as part of our pricing mechanism for grid pricing. A really important topic, and particularly with the beef on dairy influx and some of the inability of our current system. I won't give all the story away, but yield grade's an important thing, Dr. Wulf, and we really look forward to an update. You've been closely involved in some recent research and activities to make some recommendations and improvements, and we look forward to your comments. So, Dr. Wulf, I'm going to mute and then pass control to you.
Thank you, Bob. Let's see, do I got this yet? All right. Well, thank you. Great to be here. Great to be part of Genetics Forum. I'm a meat science guy, but I really like pseudogeneticists. I like genetics. So, and in order to speak today, I think you have to have the slick gene. All 4 of the faces you'll see on the webinar today are very slick on the top. So happy to be part of this group. So great, good morning to you. It's lunch probably where most of you are, but it's 10:30 in the morning right here in Arizona. So happy to be here with you. So I'm going to talk about the history, starting off first, history of yield grading. So I just want to put in a plug for this great book by Dr. Del Allen that was just published here recently. It's kind of like an encyclopedia of the meat industry history in the U.S., and especially he goes through all the different big companies and through their timelines and histories. I really enjoy this book, but it talks about grading. So in 1926, when in the Federal Register were the first U.S. standards for grades of carcass beef, and then they were implemented in May of 1927 was beef carcass quality grading services began. So that was just quality grading. Carcasses were not even ribbed at that point, so they weren't even looking at marbling in the ribeye. at that point. But in 1960, then research proposed or done by Charlie Murphy proposed a yield grading system. And then in 1962, the dual grading system, quality and yield, was started on a trial basis. And then in 1965, yield grades were officially adopted and coupled with quality grades. So if you were going to do grading, you had to do both quality and yield grading, which was undone in 1989. In 1989, yield and quality grades were uncoupled, meaning that packers could choose to either quality grade or yield grade or both. And today, most carcasses are not officially yield graded, although packers are calculating yield grades mostly with the camera system for grids and internal sorting and valuing purposes. But most carcasses are not actually stamped by the USDA anymore with a yield grade. Mostly it's just quality grade is being actually conducted by the USDA. So in 2001, instrument assessment of ribeye area was allowed. And then in 2007, instrument assessment of the whole yield grade, final yield grade was allowed. So looking at that, so we still use a yield grade equation that was developed based on 1960 research. So Charlie Murphy and others reported in the 1960 ASAP meetings, a study that had 162 beef carcasses. These were boned out in a Chicago plant. They included steers, heifers, and cows, all different quality grades. The range in carcass weight was 350 to 900 pounds. We can assume the average weight was around 600 pounds because that is the base of our yield grade equation today. So the average carcass weight at that time was roughly about 600 pounds, and the average ribeye was about 11 square inches. So they looked at 17 different variables and then came up with the 4 that we use today and developed an equation for boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts from the round loin, rib, and chuck. Then that equation was converted into a yield grade system, which originally was 10 yield grades and then simplified to 5 yield grades that we have today. So this is still the yield grade equation that we use today, based on this research from 1960. So don't have to tell you, but cattle have changed a lot since 1960. This is a champion steer in San Antonio in 1960 versus the champion steer from this year. And we all know that we've made a ton of genetic progress, ton of genetic selection to change cattle. Interestingly, I thought was interesting looking at these photos that the trophy has not changed from 1960 to 2024, still the same trophy, but cattle have changed immensely. And I mean, most exemplified by a change in weight. I mean, that increase in carcass weight shown here from 1975 into 2022 is, increasing, a little over 5 pounds a year, just a linear increase in carcass weight. And, just this week, I mean, we've increased since then. This week's 5-day rolling average heifers are averaging 865 pounds, and steers this week averaged 991 carcass weight, which equates to, and the average live weight was 1521 for steers this week. Interestingly, that if the average carcass weight was 600 pounds in 1960, that would equilibrate it to about a 970 live weight. 1960 live weight of about 970 and now our carcass weight is higher than the live weight was in 1960. So is this equation that was developed in 1960 cattle still viable today? It would seem that it should be updated. So here's some data. This is data pooled by Ty Lawrence at West Texas A&M. And this is data on 800 steers pulled from 4 different universities, and showing that yield grade predicts about 40% of the variation in red meat yield. This is in beef cattle. So not great, definitely a relationship, 40% of the variation. I mean, in comparison to our quality grading system, it does a lot better job at predicting what it's supposed to. Our quality grading system is designed to predict palatability, and explains a much smaller percentage, whereas our yield grade predicts cutability or red meat yield. And just makes sense. We can look at a carcass, we can visually examine it, we can measure things on it, and we can much more accurately determine how much fat is in relation to muscle. Then we can determine how good the steaks are going to be to eat, how tender and juicy they are. But still, it leaves a lot, there still is a lot of opportunity for improvement. The other thing you have to keep in mind when we look at these accuracies is the accuracy in measuring the dependent variable, which is red meat yield. There's error in that. You have different meat cutters. You have different levels of, you try to maintain that when you're doing research, trying to get expert meat cutters, try and maintain the same level of trim on everything, but there's variation in that. So some of the low accuracy is due to not an exact science in dissecting the carcass. So Dr. Lawrence also looked at a couple different studies with Holsteins and found that the yield grade equation actually had no relationship to red meat yield in Holsteins. And, so that makes up a significant chunk of our, or at least crosses make up a significant chunk of our population today, and, could be definitely a reason to update the equation. Some of our data out of our lab recently on some beef and dairy crosses, we actually found a little stronger relationship. We had R squared of 0.6 or 60% of the variation in box beef percentage was explained with a yield grade that was developed in 1960. So to me, that's kind of impressive that it still can do a fair job at predicting, but it certainly could be updated. So when we think about that yield grade equation, one thing we think about is ribeye area. Like our measure of fat is the fat thickness along the outside of the ribeye, but then our prediction of muscle is ribeye area. And how good a job does that ribeye area do at predicting the muscularity or the amount of product in that carcass? So again, this is Ty Lawrence, and he, of course, has a carcass data collection service, and so pulled together data from many years. This is 434,000 head of carcasses in this data set. And he showed that the 1960 equation, which is a yield grade equation, which equates to 1.2 inches of ribeye for every 100 pounds of carcass, is not exactly accurate. The slope is actually not that steep. In today's cattle, there's only 0.8 inch difference per 100 pounds. So just an evidence that our ribeye equation is a little bit out of date and could benefit from being updated. And then how well does that do at predicting meat throughout, or muscle product throughout the whole carcass? So we have other issues with ribeye, like the accuracy of how accurately can we measure it. We know that ribbing the carcass, when we separate it between the 12th and 13th rib, can have a huge effect on ribeye area. Just the error, human error, or differences in ribbing, just the angle that you cut through that muscle can make, over a 2-inch difference just on how that carcass was ribbed. We know that that longissimus muscle is next to the rib bones, and as that longissimus muscle goes along the rib bones, it kind of goes in and out between the ribs. So when you're right between the rib, which is where you're supposed to rib the carcass, the ribeye is actually bigger or larger than when you're right at a rib. So you can see on this picture on the right, this is an incorrectly ribbed carcass where the person ribbing the carcass hit the rib bone too early, and that ribeye is significantly smaller than what it should actually be, and how it should actually predict the merit of that carcass. So this shows another example of the carcass on the right being correctly ribbed, and the one on the left, we did not hit the rib bone, but we're getting close to the rib bone. And even as you're getting close to the rib bone, you can see that the ribeye is going to be smaller. You can see on the carcass on the right that the ribeye muscle actually goes in between the rib bones, and so it actually overlaps a little bit of the rib right there. And so getting an accurate ribeye measurement is not always an exact science, is the point of that. This is some data from Texas Tech, from Blake Forker, and on beef on dairy crosses. And this data set shows that the ribeye area might not be a great indicator of all the muscling in the carcass. For example, the round muscling. They visually scored the steers on a muscling score in the round live, and then you can see that plotted on the bottom left, the live muscle score compared to the round muscling score, which they scored in the cooler. So looking in the cooler, then they again scored them visually, and there was a stronger relationship there than there was between the ribeye and the round muscling score, which kind of makes sense because you're looking at the same thing live as you're looking at the carcass on the left, and on the bottom right, you're trying to use the ribeye area. But the ribeye area may not be perfectly correlated with all the muscling throughout the whole carcass. So a better system would take into account a measure of muscle throughout all of the cuts and not just the ribeye muscle. Now, even though this is back to some of our data just to show the concept that even though the ribeye might not be it might not be the perfect indicator of all the muscle in the carcass, I do think it's a better indicator of the value of the carcass than maybe some other muscles might be, because the longismus is the largest muscle in the carcass, and it's by far the most valuable. When you figure price per pound times the size of the muscle, it is by far the most valuable muscle in the carcass. So these correlations here show, the top ones here show weight. If we look at ribeye area and its correlation with red meat weight, all the pounds of meat in the carcass, we had a correlation of 0.63. But if we look at red meat value, the dollars of meat in the carcass, it was slightly higher. And then if we do it at a weight constant basis, which is what's shown at the bottom, a weight constant basis, we put ribeye per hundredweight and correlate that with red meat percentage, we get a correlation of 0.45. If we look at ribeye area per hundredweight and correlate with dollars per hundredweight in the carcass, that correlation is much higher. So even though ribeye might not be a perfect indicator of all the different muscling and throughout the carcass, and especially round muscling, it is more associated with value than the rest of the carcass. Another way to look at that is, remember back, I already showed you this, but this is our relationship between yield grade and box beef percentage. So yield grade on the bottom, box beef percentage on the left, we had R squared of 0.6. If we look at yield grade compared to box beef cutout or value, now we have box beef cutout on the left. This is, you can see how much beef prices have gone up since this research was conducted. Beef prices are a lot higher than that now, but we see that the R square has gone up to 0.7. So we have it's yield grade. This is yield grade now is more correlated with value than it is with actual yield because of that longismus effect, and longismus really driving value. But it could be improved, and of course, and that's what some of the current research is focused on. So NCBA has put together a red meat yield task force. I saw Dr. Jessica Lancaster is watching the Zoom, so she's kind of coordinating this, and kudos to her for putting this together. And so this task force involves industry and university people from around the country looking at, especially should we update the yield grade equation. So we're looking at a variety of different things in this task force, but one thing we looked at was the effective KPH fat removal. So most plants today will remove the kidney, pelvic, and heart fat, but the kidney, pelvic, and heart fat is part of the yield grade equation. So the plants are required, if they're using yield grade, they need to weigh the carcass before and after kidney, pelvic, and heart removal so they can get a calculated KPH fat for the yield grade. But what if we just removed it all? What if we just took it out of the whole system and we use KPH removed carcass weight, or carcass weight without KPH, as our pay weight? instead of including KPH. And that's what I'm trying to look at here with this little example. Again, this is from those beef on dairy carcasses. So on the left, we see with KPH, the hot carcass weight was 852. We had a 64.2% dress. On the right, if we remove if we use the KPH out hot carcass weight, of course, we have a lower hot carcass weight and a lower dress percentage. If we went to that as a pay weight, the market would have to adjust accordingly. The price per pound would need to be higher. But the more important thing from a genetic standpoint and what market signals are we sending is dressing percentage really drives a lot of equations. It drives a lot of profitability to the feeder. It goes into your genetic equation. If you're predicting feed conversion, a lot of times you do feed conversion per pound of hot carcass weight. So dressing percentage really sends a lot of economic signals through the system. So if we could remove some of that fat out of that hot carcass weight, the dressing percentage with red meat yield would actually be a little more highly correlated. And that's what's shown on the bottom left. You see with the KPH in carcass, the correlation between dressing percentage and red meat yield or boxed beef yield is 0.39. But on the right, if we remove the hot carcass weight, just a very simple little change in the process, that correlation between dressing percentage and boxed beef yield goes up. So makes sense. We're taking out some of the fat. So we're not rewarding the producer as much for producing fat and sending an economic signal a little bit stronger, at least as related to dressing percentage. That's a little more related to red meat yield. So that's one. I know Colorado State is looking at some data for KPH removal and looking at how that would affect economics and such. So that's one thing the task force is looking at. The bigger thing, probably the more energy that the task force is putting into is looking at technologies to better predict red meat yield than our current yield grade equation. And the initial research on that is really trying to get a gold standard red meat yield because it's very expensive to measure red meat yield. It takes a big cutout test, takes a packing plant, takes a lot of people. And you want people that are good at boning beef. You want to be consistent. So so Dale Warner at Texas Tech and others are looking at using CT scan technology, which can very accurately differentiate composition to be kind of a gold standard for predicting red meat yield. Not as an online system because it's very expensive, very difficult to implement in an online system, but a way to test other technologies. So if another technology came along or we wanted to upgrade the camera system that we currently use and improve the equation, we could rapidly, or fairly rapidly from a research standpoint, test several hundred carcasses using the CT scan as kind of the gold standard to tell us exactly what is the red meat yield across different wholesale cuts, not just total body, but total by individual cuts, by value, and then the test valuable online systems as far as which one is the best, and developing an online system that can rapidly and more accurately measure red meat yield. So this is ongoing right now. This is a big focus right now of kind of phase one of the task force. The last thing I want to talk about real quickly is red meat yield receiving enough selection pressure from a genetic standpoint. So i.e. muscling. I think from a genetic standpoint, red meat yield, the primary driver from a genetic standpoint is muscling. Every animal is a yield grade 1 at some point in its life, but after the muscle stops growing, fat starts depositing, and red meat yield goes down. So what are the economic signals that we're sending? So I think a lot of the grids are still go back to 1967 when IBP first introduced boxed beef. When IBP first introduced boxed beef, it was called cattle pack. Their max fat spec at that time was 1 inch of fat. They only trimmed the fat if it was over 1 inch of fat, and everything else was sold on the beef. And since then, we moved to closely trimmed, which is now most meat is marketed 1/4 inch of fat. But at an inch of fat, you don't really trim off any fat until you get to a yield grade 4. So IBP set the spec that they didn't put into box beef. Anything that was yield grade 4, anything that didn't grade choice initially was sold out the door as swinging beef, and only yield grade 3s and better were put into boxes. And historically, then we've had a big discount. This is a USDA premium discount report from a couple days ago. And, this has been this way for a long time. We have a big discount at yield grade 4, and I think it dates a lot back to the invention and the implementation of box beef. If we look, we do have daily report, or this is a weekly report, the National Comprehensive Box Beef Cutout. This is the one that came out this week. This tells you the cutout values for each of the quality grades. So prime, you can see prime, branded, upper 2/3 choice, select, and no roll. And the price, if you take all the different box beef cuts and what they traded for this week, put them in a standard cutout, and this is the value. This is a very important report that's used every week by the industry. I had one cattle buyer tell me from a major packer, this is what he looks at every week. Before he goes buy his cattle, he looks at this report to know what is the price, what's the value difference right now in meat between the quality grades. And so therefore he knows how much to buy cattle. So obviously this report is sending back a lot of economic signals back to the beef industry. If we look at the cutout values there shown on the top, so that first line there is just the differences from choice based on this sheet, based on this report. You see right now prime is $43 higher than choice. Branded beef is $4 higher. Select is 22 back. Ungraded is 37 back. If we compare that to the premium discounts being paid, according to the premium discounts report, we see that most of them are very close. Prime right now, I mean, I don't know how much to believe that premium discounts report. It's a simple average, and the maximum premium for prime right now in that report was $38. So it highly dependent on probably the packer and the grid. But in general, except for the case of prime in this report, the premiums and discounts paid to producers very much follow the value of the meat, very closely follow the value of meat. I think these values in this comprehensive box beef cutout, maybe even slightly overemphasize the value difference between those grades, because they assume 100% utilization. For example, if something is branded CAB, that means 100% of that beef is sold as CAB, or if it's branded prime, 100% of that sold as prime. Well, that's not really true, because a lot of the cuts, the end meats don't have the demand, and they're often just sold as choice, even though they might be a branded product or even prime product. They're often just sold with choice product. So if anything, there might be a slight overestimation in how much we're paying for quality grades. So this is not a report. So this is unknown information. This is what I wish we had a report on. So this is what would be, according to my calculations, right, the current yield grade box beef cutout based on choice carcasses. And this is based on our data we have, which assumes a 4.3 value difference between yield grades. That may or may not be right, but I have confidence it's probably fairly close. If you look at the premiums and discounts here, the cutout here would be a yield grade 1 should be worth 27 more, or is worth $27 more than a yield grade 3. The yield grade 2 is worth $14, etc. What is the actual premium discounts being paid? Well, only $3 for a yield grade 1, $2 for a 2, etc. Again, the yield grade 4 and 5 accurately reflect. But remember, most of the cattle that we're marketing are yield grade 2s and 3s. Still, 4s keep going up, but still more U2s and 3s, and that value is not reflected back through the chain. So what I wish we had was a more comprehensive box beef cutout that showed the actual values of the quality grades and the yield grades together, and to send the right economic signals back. Why is that important? I mean, true value is really important because that really drives millions of dollars of cattle every week. And, that affects selection indexes, that affects dollar value EPDs, because those are all calculated using the premium discounts as the end product And so it drives selection decisions. And if those premium discounts are not correct, we might not be selecting for the highest value cattle. So sorry if it went long. Since this is a brown bag lecture, I leave you with a lunch. This is a restaurant in Arizona. They have a couple locations. The Brown Bag Burger. There it is.
Looks delicious. Great. Well, Duane, thank you for that. We'll open it up for if anybody's got a real quick burning question, and hopefully you're able to hang around for just a minute, Duane. We'll get David through as well and open it up broadly for questions for the two of you. But I think your point there at the end is a really important one, and germane to this group of genetic enthusiasts. Have we been selecting for the right things? And being able to quantify that, obviously from a phenotypic standpoint, is really important. So I like the forward thinking of the research group to actually go and get a bunch of CT data to have in a repository for testing of future stuff without having to go back to the plant, if you will, every time to do another cutting trial, right? So CT can be really, really useful for that. So
yeah, I can hang around. So
okay, great.
Program.
I don't see any questions right off. I've got another couple that I've been thinking about that I'll throw at you when we come back on the flip. But Duane, thanks so much for your comments, and man, that burger looks really good. So I'm gonna have to go get lunch. Great, thanks, Duane. Our next speaker here is Dr. David Lust. Dr. Lust is going to give us an invite for the 2025 Beef Improvement Federation meeting. I had the pleasure of working with David last week. We had our mid-year BIF meeting in Kansas City, and David came as the host committee representative to work through our program discussion. Dr. Lust, for those of you that are frequent BIF attenders, he'll be a familiar face to you. David's attended a lot of BIF meetings over time, and that's where he and I first met back, I think maybe in the 90s somewhere, we figured out. But sure have enjoyed his friendship and professional relationship over time as well. Dr. Lust grew up in Texas Panhandle, so he's one of those lucky fellows that's not had to venture too far from home for his academic career. But he grew up on a diversified family operation that included some irrigated crop production, seed stock Angus operation, some stocker cattle, and a small feed yard. He joined the Department of Ag Sciences at West Texas A&M in 1992 as an instructor and coach of the judging team. And he previously completed a degree in ag education at Texas Tech University, and then a master's in animal science at Michigan State. And then at WT completed his PhD in 2008. He's taught animal science for over 30 years, has an emphasis on introductory principles of animal science, cow-calf management, animal breeding, and courses related to live animal and carcass evaluation, which is kind of a keystone of the department there at WT. He serves as faculty coordinator for WT's 2,300-acre Nance Ranch and oversees the teaching and research projects related to cow herd and rangeland management, and the many youth events that y'all host there at WT. And became an administrator in August of 2024, serves as the department head for agricultural sciences at West Texas A&M. David, welcome.
Thank you.
Your comments here, and most certainly continuing to work with you on BIF 2025. Floor is yours, sir.
Great. I'll see if the slide will advance. There we go. Well, thanks, Bob, and what a great program today. And I wanted to say that we're really, really excited to be able to host the Beef Improvement Federation Symposium and Convention in Amarillo, Texas, and that'll be June 9th through the 12th next year. And so on behalf of my boss, Dr. Kevin Pond, who is the Dean of our Paul Engler College of Ag and Natural Sciences, along with several of my colleagues, Dr. Tommy Perkins, who's well known to BIF, and Dr. Ty Lawrence, who's Dr. Wulf just mentioned some of his research. We just couldn't be more excited to be able to host the BIF convention in Amarillo. As you can see on the map, Amarillo is kind of the center of the Southern Plains region. It's a multi-state region that we serve and includes a lot of things that make it a great site for the Beef Improvement Federation Convention. And just a little bit about the region. One of the things that makes Amarillo a great place for this convention is because we've got all segments of the beef industry that are in the region. And of course, we may be most known for cattle feeding. And within 100 miles of Amarillo, we do feed about 30% of the fed beef in the United States is fed within this region. Some of the early pioneers like Paul Engler brought cattle feeding to the Southern Plains. We're also a big center for the beef processing in the United States, and actually a little bit more than 30% of the beef that are processed in the United States are processed in this region as well. Another intensive industry in the region, the area surrounding Amarillo and into the eastern New Mexico is the third largest milk shed in the United States. And so there's a large dairy industry here. And that's, of course, relevant to our beef industry because of the beef that comes from full dairy cattle, and also the emphasis on beef and dairy that we've seen in more recent years. And I might just mention that these concentrated industries mean that we are a thriving hub of science and research and technology and data. And so that you'll find in this region, if there's technology or research that's being done in the beef industry or in the beef production chain, there's probably some of it that's going to be going on with our allied industry partners that are in this region. Of course, we're in shortgrass country here up on top. If you look at the slide down here, we are near the Cap Rock, and up on top where Amarillo is, it looks like this. It's shortgrass country, and we're reminded of droughts and the challenges that cow-calf producers face just about very regularly. We also have in the region some more rolling country, and so there's some diverse landscapes and diverse challenges that cow-calf producers face in this region. So there's a lot going on here. And in our program, I appreciate the great and robust discussion that we had with the BIF board last week, and we were starting to look at the program. But I think in the program, you can expect to learn about these different industry segments that are in the region, including the cattle feeding industry, the carcass processing industry, the beef industry, and especially how genetic improvement driven by the Beef Improvement Federation has affected and benefited those industry segments. Probably some hope to learn some things about cattle feeding and beef processing and the dairy industry and some of their economic drivers that may not be as familiar to a lot of cow-calf producers. But we want to explore things going on in the region. The other thing I was really interested by today's program, that big data technology is certainly a big issue. In addition, sustainability and different metrics and how that might or might not affect each of these industry segments. Those are big issues. And so I expect in our programming, we will address some of those topics and probably a continuation of some of the topics that were addressed here today in the brown bag. Also want to welcome everyone to West Texas A&M University. So we do have for the program, we will have an evening session with a social hosted on our campus at WT, which is just a short drive, 15, 20 minutes from Amarillo. We've got a wonderful new facility that opened in 2018, and that facility will include the Beef Carcass Research Center, our university meat laboratory, and so we'll get to tour that and take a look at that, and also hear from some of our meats group with the Cavaness Meat Science and Innovation Center. In addition, the Shark Tank graduate student pitch competition that we had last year in Tennessee was certainly a popular event, and we plan to continue that and maybe even do some slightly different things with it. We have this wonderful facility here on our campus, giant video screen, and so we're well equipped to handle a large crowd and have a nice social event on campus, and have the Shark Tank graduate student pitch competition, an evening event similar to what we had last year in Tennessee. So we really look forward to being able to invite everyone to our campus and give a look at the programs that we have and the industry connections that we're involved with here at West Texas A&M. We're still working on, we talked a little bit in our programming meeting, Bob, on industry tour, and the challenge we have is that we'll just be making choices about what not to go see, because we are kind of overwhelmed with opportunities for great stops for a tour or tours, but some that we would expect will make their way into the tours would be certainly a feedlot. We've got multiple really great ranches nearby that we could visit that could be commercial operations or seed stock operations, some historic operations, some operations that may focus more on grazing sustainability. And so we'll work through the schedules and the logistics to include some of those stops. Of course, we'll probably plan to have a dairy stop on at least some of the tours, and probably looking at some beef on dairy operations, so we can take a look at some of those cattle, hopefully. And then, as I mentioned, we've got a lot of industry activity in the region, and so we may be able to work in some things that are not strictly cattle focused, but that may be having to do with feed management, energy production, a variety of other things, or historic things that we could see in the Texas Panhandle. So no shortage of opportunities in terms of our tours. Our challenge is going to be limiting how many places we go and the time and the mileage that we have. We've got wonderful accommodations in Amarillo. The Embassy Suites Hotel will be the headquarters hotel, and then we've got a couple of other overflow hotels that are just a block or two away. And this is in downtown Amarillo. And I know everyone will be happy to know we have the Amarillo Civic Center is across the street from the headquarters hotel. So you walk across the street and you'll be at the convention center. We have a large convention center, so there will be lots of space for breakout sessions, for rooms, for meals, for the socials. All of that can be very nicely accommodated at the Amarillo Civic Center, and within walking distance of the main hotel as well as other hotels. And I might mention the Embassy Suites has an excellent steakhouse right here in the hotel. There's other good eating places nearby within walking distance, and so there's several good steak options there in downtown Amarillo. And we also have across the street, mention this, Hodgetown, which is a new stadium for our minor league baseball team, which is the Sod Poodles, and we'll explain that at some point. But we would very much like you to bring your family, plan to stay an extra day before or after the BIF convention. There's a lot of great things to do in the Amarillo area. Might mention just a couple of them here. The Panhandle Plains Historical Museum is on our campus at WT. It is the largest historical museum in the state of Texas, and it is the place where Colonel Charles Goodnight and the Goodnight Loving Trail or if you're familiar with the story of Lonesome Dove, that sprang from his relationship with his partner. And that history is and collections are displayed here at the Panhandle Plains Museum, along with probably the largest collection related to the Comanches in Paladura Canyon and the Red River Wars in the 1800s. As I mentioned, the Hodgetown Sod Poodles baseball is across the street. They will be in town during BIF, so there may be opportunities for folks to attend the game or possibly a reception or event there. Paladura Canyon is a few miles away. That's the second largest canyon in the United States after the Grand Canyon, and so there's lots of hiking. It's one of a world-class mountain biking destination, and there is also an outdoor musical drama called Texas that's been running since the early 70s there, that details the history of the Panhandle and particularly ranchers and farmers and the Comanches. The Cadillac Ranch and, of course, historic Route 66 are also attractions there in Amarillo, and so there's no shortage of things to be done in and around the area. So with that, Bob, I've kept it reasonably short, but I'm certainly available to answer any questions that people may have. We could not be more excited about hosting the BIF convention in Amarillo coming up June 9th through 12th.
Great. Thanks, David. And that was one of the questions actually posted in our Q&A. It was what a reminder of the dates, June 9th through 12th, there in Amarillo of June of 2025, that is. And really looking forward to, I hadn't been to Amarillo in some time, and so was delighted when visited. Just a beautiful location, and of course the many improvements on WT campus of recent years. Just a beautiful site for us to visit. And thanks, David, for all you do to help make it a success. So questions, we'll open up the floor for attendees again. For either Dr. Wulf or Lust related to end product stuff or BIF or topics beyond, I suppose. But anybody have other questions for Duane or David? Duane, I saw you answered one via the type-in text from Dr. Hammock, inquiring if we might actually have a change in the yield grade equation. And I'll let you answer it, but BIF would be interested in the phenotypes that might come out. So maybe share a little bit about maybe prognostication of both whether that will happen and what kind of timeline it might look like.
Yeah, so I mean, the NCBA Red Meat Yield Task Force is looking at different technologies. How can we most accurately and rapidly predict red meat yield? So that's kind of the goal. The goal has not been stated with the intent to change the yield grade system, but that would probably, that would be an industry question that would follow that. If there were technologies or equations that were superior, which we think they will be, then that would be like logically the next question: should the yield grade system be changed?
Yeah, super. I think that's an important point here. Is one, been some time since there was a really deep dive into the quality of yield grades. I remember back in the early 90s, yield grade was a question because we were experiencing heavier carcass weights, which in retrospect now would be lighter weight cattle. But been an industry topic for some time.
Just a little bit of follow up on that. So we did have some discussion in that task force, like, should our first focus be, let's look at our current equation and just update it because, Dr. Lawrence's data shows, the ribeye carcass weight relationship's not correct, and make some tweaks to our current equation, update it. And we decided like we should just look further beyond that and go for what's, don't just tweak what we have, but let's find what's really going to, be the ultimate solution, which is a rapid method online system that can accurately predict red meat yield.
Go to the modern versus tweak. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the old equation's north of 50 years old, so not surprising we might have better ways to do it. So good. Other questions from the audience? Anybody for Dr. Wulf or Lust here? We've run a bit over, but for those frequent attendees, know this session has a tendency to go a little bit longer because of our 3 speakers. So we'll give everybody a second here. Gentlemen, do appreciate you very much sticking with us and your contributions to today's sessions. And also to our attendees. So we've had a good run here. We had over 250 folks register for the webinar series. So know that week to week we get a cross section of some of those folks, but really tremendous uptake this year of the program, and I think much to do with the lineup of outstanding speakers we've had. Gentlemen, thank you. I know a few of the previous speakers are also on today. Thanks all for your contributions. Just a couple of wrap-up things, housekeeping here. Again, David and Duane, thanks so much for today. You will get attendees a evaluation invitation in your inbox here in the next week or two to tell us what you thought about this year's Brown Bagger series. And we are deeply appreciative of you spending a few minutes to tell us about your experience this year, what you thought of the topics that Spangler, Bullock, and I put together. And also keenly interested in suggestions for next year's topic list. So we take that contribution from you seriously. In fact, a number of this year's speakers were recommendations from last year's Brown Bagger, and so we try and be really attentive and accommodating to those requests from you, our audience. And we'll appreciate that. Again, a reminder, here in the next few weeks, we will have the recordings from all sessions posted up to eBEEF.org. I will send an email when those are available on the eBEEF website to your inbox. So if you are a registered attendee this year, which obviously you all are because you made it here today, you'll get a notice when those are available. Thanks and hats off to colleagues Spangler and Bullock for your help this year. I think a really outstanding series, and we'll look forward to seeing many of you around industry events later this fall and through the spring, and certainly hope to see many of you in Amarillo for the Beef Improvement Federation meeting June 9 through 12, 2025. With that, we'll sign off for now. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a great week.